What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the newest episode of the One Piece vlog, and for this episode, with my Water 7 arc review, I decided to do it in a more video essay style because my studio, I'm kind of redoing my setup right now. I didn't really get it done in time for this video, so next week you should see my face talking to the camera for these One Piece vlogs. Again, new One Piece vlog every Thursday. And today I want to talk about the Water 7 Saga, kind of my review, overall thoughts of it. And off the bat, I think Water 7 may be the best arc in One Piece so far. It's definitely up there. I'm not 100% sure if I'm sold that it's the best so far, because it has many moments that I think are just unmatched in quality, and I've talked about a few of them already in past videos, but I do think there is one or two aspects to the arc that hold it back from actually being just one of the best things that I have ever read. Certainly one of the best arcs I've ever read, and there was just a few things that kind of frustrated me that held it back from being a 10 out of 10. But to kind of jump into what I thought about the series, again, humor is a constant in One Piece. I've talked about how at times it feels like the series is a straight up comedy, and it's a big part of the Water 7 saga, whether it's how funny Frankie can be, or just the interactions between the Straw Hats and the members of CP9. And I think a good example of that is the side fights in this finale of the arc at Enies Lobby. Those kind of side fights feel like they're what Marvel movies are trying to do. The fights are super interesting, the powers are obviously interesting, but humor works in a super interesting way that keeps me motivated even though it's not the main battle. A great example of that is Usopp and Zoro when they are handcuffed together, and everything around that scenario is just unbelievably funny, and so it adds to my intrigue for that fight, because even though Usopp does go through a little bit of development, but Zoro doesn't really go through any development through many of his fights in the series. So having that humor is so big, and it does feel like it's like what Marvel movies try to do. Like Marvel movies try to have so much humor, and at best they reach kind of the surface of what One Piece is able to accomplish in their fights. But Marvel, and I've talked about this in other videos, like Marvel's fights, the humor tends to take away from the drama of the fights, but in One Piece, it kind of flips it on its head, and the humor enforces the drama and helps put the characters in super unique situations. And because of the strong world building, having a character turn into a giraffe is hilarious, but also like plausible because of the world that's been presented to us by Oda. And I was actually just listening to the newest episode, or one of, depending on when this episode is released, one of the newest episodes of the One Piece Virgin podcast with Nux, Animac, and Briggs. And Nux had a really interesting point that I wanted to bring up here, where he said that kind of how that's done. It's a very typical kind of trope in shonen anime to have just the side people go fight the other henchmen of the organization. Often they have some unique powers, but typically those are just build-ups to, and often things that you want to like kind of skim through to get to the main fight. But Water 7 at Enies Lobby, it never feels like that. Honestly, there were times when I was watching it where like I almost would rather read the side fights and get lost in the side fights than even caring about the main fight between Luffy and Rob Lucci. And so Nux did say that he thinks it's one of the best, if not the best, example of kind of that technique being used. And I think he kind of hit it on the head, especially when, I think there's kind of two ways that you can do it. One of the ways is like it is in Enies Lobby, where the humor and the interactions between the characters is what fuels the action and makes it so interesting. And so the other way would kind of be to have big character growth moments versus the side characters, so at least you're getting character progression. And I think those are kind of the two best ways to do it. And I think One Piece and Enies Lobby, this is one of the best examples of me being interested in the side fights for this huge cast of characters. And that kind of goes into CP9. I think CP9 is actually, like, I don't really find any of them outside of Rob Lucci to be, like, terrifying or anything like that, but they are interesting and compelling, where their interactions almost mirror that of the Straw Hats, especially when they show up to Ennis Lobby and you kind of see the other members of it, and kind of the banter between them. It's just another great example of the Navy and the pirates are kind of cut from the same cloth, and one of the things that fuels all the interactions throughout this 400 chapters or whatever in the series is the interactions between the Straw Hats. And so seeing that from CP9 and having that be fueled in the fight scenes was really good, but you still didn't miss out on having a few big moments, specifically the moment with Chopper when he goes into like the monster mode and showing how far he would go to save Robin was one of the best moments in the entire saga. And so I really liked that point by Nux, and you guys should go check out the One Piece Virgin podcast if you haven't, because they're going over everything that I am, and we're at a similar place in reading. And kind of transitioning into some of the best moments in the saga, I think my favorite moment it has to be Usopp versus Luffy. I made a whole video on that, so you can check that out for more in-depth thoughts. But that happens pretty early in the saga, right when they get to Water 7. And then that moment is heart-wrenching. I think it might be the best fight in all of One Piece, and I definitely think it's the best fight in the saga, which might be surprising to some people. But the emotion that Oda is able to put in that fight, and that's also really important for Usopp and his character throughout the rest of this arc. I love what they do with him, and of course I love what they do with Robin and her character. I also made a video all about Robin. She is my current favorite character, and a big reason for that is her backstory, which is sad and compelling at the same time. Again, I go more in depth into Robin's backstory in the last video of this vlog, but she also kind of in this arc helps continue some of the themes about how knowledge is spread and how you view yourself with how knowledge is kind of viewed by the masses. That was kind of started in the Skypiea arc, or really explored heavily in the Skypiea arc. And then I also love when Usopp, or Sniper King, makes his shot. That might be the most hype moment in this entire saga, when he shows up and he's singing. That moment is so amazing because you know that Usopp is an incredibly valuable person to the crew, or else they would have never brought him on if they didn't see some type of value in him, and not necessarily like in a cynical way, but like he has to bring something to the table if they're going to be, if Luffy's ever going to accomplish what he wants to do, if he's actually going to become the king of the pirates, he can't bring on members of the crew who are absolutely useless. And so for Robin and Usopp to kind of come to terms with how they're viewed and kind of giving themselves to the Straw Hats, that was kind of all accumulated into that moment where Usopp steps in and saves Robin. And of course you get with Robin's backstory, you get the I want to live moment. So both of those moments I thought were the most emotional, while there is still some other great moments that hit the emotional threads. I think those two were probably my favorite from this Water 7 saga. Frankie is another great addition to the crew. I'm excited that they're getting even more crew members. He's hilarious. I think he plays off of everyone in the crew in a great way. Obviously, Oda's great at writing characters, so Frankie is a welcome. Even, when I first was reading it, I was like, I don't know what I really think about Frankie. Like, is he really going to be a good addition to the crew? But then midway through the arc, it's like, I cannot wait till he's actually accepted into the crew. And that was the moment where Robin like grabs his balls, but right before he joins the crew is it's hilarious. That's such a funny moment. And Robin is also, she doesn't have that many humorous moments, but when she does, they really land. And lastly, the kind of best moments is everything with the merry-go. Obviously, at the beginning, I want them to keep going on with the merry-go, and that was tough to come to terms with, and led with kind of the last straw for Usopp, kind of not feeling like he's a part of the crew. And then at the end, when the merry-go saves them, and then they still have to send it away, that was also another super emotional moment. And of course, I will always cry over the merry-go. The merry-go is incredible. So those were kind of my main highlights, and I think most people kind of agree with that. I've said this before, I think the beginning of the Water 7 saga is one of the highest peaks that the early in an arc that you get, but specifically with Usopp and everything that's going on with Robin. It's super emotional and it's intriguing, while one of my biggest criticisms of the Skypiea arc is that even though I thought it ended absolutely spectacularly, the beginning was not that great, and it took me a while to get into the world of Skypiea, and that's one of the reasons that, like, the 3 times that I've tried to watch it over the last 15 years, I've never gotten past Skypiea, because the beginning of that arc just struggled a little bit, and it really holds it back. And so this arc, for everything that it was going for, I thought it was on pace to just be one of the greatest arcs I've ever seen. And not to say that the arc isn't great, because it has a lot of amazing moments in it, the saga, I guess. And it kind of all comes down to the reason I wouldn't, I haven't really put like a rating on any of the sagas, but if I would rate this, I would rate it probably around a 9 out of 10, which is absolutely incredible. That shows you how much I like the arc. But the reason that I don't think the Water 7 saga is a slam dunk 10 out of 10 is actually because of the fight between Luffy and Rob Lucci. So kind of diving into their fight, I think it's pretty amazing from a hype and emotional standpoint, but for some reason it just didn't land with me as much as I thought it would. And maybe that's expectations from kind of unfair expectations from kind of hearing about like the legend of Rob Lucci. Like, I feel like since I've been involved in the anime community, I just always hear about, oh my gosh, the fight between Luffy and Rob Lucci is unbelievable. And I think, like, the action-wise, it's really interesting, and how the fight flows throughout the action. The choreography of the fight is super interesting. But I felt that it could have reached further from, like, an ideological perspective. One of the best things about Oda's character writing is that he is great with backstories and putting us in the position where we can kind of come to terms with how a character got to where they are, but then that's always enforced by their very strong ideology. Every character has an ideology that is the core of their existence that drives them forward. And that's one of the most satisfying things in the show, because specific ideologies then fuel fights when you have 2 people who have different ideologies. It enlifts the fight. And for an example, Kami from the Skypiea arc, it really wasn't the greatest like technical fight I've ever seen. But the reason I liked it so much is that Kami was a god, or he thought it was a god, and there was all the classic tropes that come with that, with a character who looks down on the people around him. But then he was defeated by like a technicality, because Luffy was rubber, showing that even though he identified as a god, he didn't know that rubber even existed. And so there was that little moment to it where, as a god, when you identify yourself like that, that's part of your ideology, that you just think you're better than everyone. And that was completely shattered through just the existence of Luffy, not even Luffy's ideology. And then all of that enforced the viewpoint of knowledge that is explored so heavily throughout the Skypiea arc. And that's one of the reasons I felt that fight specifically hit so hard, even though the technical fight of it wasn't that great. So then coming back to the Rob Lucci fight, Rob Lucci, he has an absolutely incredible design. Rob Lucci just looks like a badass at all times, and the only thing that I wanted more from him is I wanted to hear a lot more about his ideology, why he's doing what he's doing, and you get a little bit of that with his backstory and kind of the ruthless nature of him. But he honestly feels a little bit like a bump in the plot versus a actual character who is standing in front of like Luffy's way of life. So I don't think the fight is bad. Far from it. I think the fight is really good, and it's one of the better fights just because of the sheer hype around it and the emotion around, like when Usopp yells back to Luffy, and Luffy being able to overcome it. But I feel like if his ideology was explored more, it would have made the end of the Water 7 saga hit even harder. And I think there was maybe I don't really like to talk about missed opportunities because I want to talk about the story that's just presented to me. But if you'll indulge me for a second, I think that, you would think that Luffy, he lost 2 members of his crew at the exact same time. And as a captain, there has to be some people who are questioning his leadership. It's no secret that Luffy is not the smartest person around. But he always had this weird ability to kind of keep the people around him and believing in him. And that's one of the reasons I think he's such a great protagonist. But then all of a sudden he loses 2 members of his crew. And you would think, some of the blame has to be put on Luffy. And even if the Straw Hats, even if all the members, the rest of the members, Sanji, Zoro, Nami, Chopper, if they all know, we know Luffy, that, it's just this thing with Robin that we don't really know about. And just because of the way we do it, we don't want to know about your backstory. And we tell you we believe in you and we go for it. That's totally fine. And I don't think anyone in the Straw Hats really needed to critique Luffy. But you would think that Rob Lucci would have called him out, because Rob Lucci is the top dog of the CP9 group that was going undercover for like 5 years in a random city where they're all carpenters and not one of them leaves. And maybe it's because they're out of fear of the higher Navy government, but that has to be some leadership on Rob Lucci. To be able to keep those people with him. And so you would think he would have attacked Luffy there, or somehow it would have been explored, or just really anything. I just wanted to know. I think Lucci, they presented him in a really cool way, but for how long he's actually in the story, I feel like I know way too little about him for the amount of chapters I've read with him as a main focus of it. And I feel like that would have given that final fight an extra tick above, because it is the most technically interesting and hype fight so far in the series. But the only reason that I can argue that I think the final fight in Skypiea, or even the fight with Crocodile, is better, is because it doesn't have that ideological conflict at the core of that fight. And so I don't know if I'm being too harsh on it. I don't know if I somehow missed some of his ideology. I don't think I did. I know that he's still in the story, and I know he's going to come back one day, and I'm really excited for that, because I feel like there was some potential miss there. And even though it might be, my favorite arc in One Piece, I think it's in a similar vein to the Alabasta and Skypiea arcs. I don't think one of them is like way better than the other, and I probably need to sit on it for a while, so maybe I'll kind of come back to this question, in a few more weeks when I kind of think on it a little bit more and kind of figure out exactly which arc I like the best, because I did just finish this Water 7 arc pretty recently, so my opinions could change on it, and I kind of want to go back. I'm going to watch the Rob Lucci fight in the anime, because I've heard that that's pretty awesome to see, and I've seen clips of it every once in a while, but I'm gonna sit down and watch that. So my opinion could definitely change on the Rob Lucci fight, but I feel like there was a little bit to be desired in the form of the ideological conflict between Luffy and Lucci, and that's kind of what holds it from being a great arc in One Piece to maybe being one of the greatest arcs or sagas that I've literally ever seen. But it definitely was awesome. I really, really enjoyed Water 7, even if I did kind of talk about just that fight. I was looking for a little bit more, but every other part of the arc was awesome. So that was kind of my review. If I had to put a number on it, I'd probably give it a 9 out of 10 right now. There definitely was a chance. It was so close to being a 10 out of 10. But I'll keep thinking on that a little bit. Right now, I'd probably give Skypiea and Alabasta around an 8 or an 8.5. So that does show that I do think Water 7 is probably a tick above. And I'm really excited. I've been reading Thriller Bark. And so next week, since Thriller Bark isn't that long, especially compared to the Water 7 saga, I think I'm just going to be coming out with a Thriller Bark review next week as well. And so if if any of my thoughts on Water 7 change, you can see that in the video. I think Water 7 was super enjoyable. The last thing I kind of want to talk about real quick before ending this video is the implications of Luffy against the Navy. And obviously he's up to a 300 million berry bounty, which is awesome, and it's always super satisfying to see the bounty grow. But the implications that the rest of the world has, and that Luffy's actions feel like they actually have consequences now, and that's another really cool part about Water 7, is that things are starting to pick up, it feels like. And I'm interested because Skypiea also was so secluded, and that's one of the reasons it's hard to rate it any higher than I did. And Water 7 feels like it has big implications for the near future for the Straw Hats, so I'm really excited to see that. The next episode, next Thursday, look out for that. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought about Water 7. Kind of where does it rank? You know, if you were going to rank it out of 10, would you give it around a 9? Did you have the same thing about Rob Lucci? I need to talk to more people about this now that I've caught up to it. I'm going to go watch it, but let me know if you liked Rob Lucci, if you wanted more out of him, if you thought he fit the story well, and kind of what you thought of Water 7. I'll see you next Thursday for the Thriller Bark review.